Hey, it's Jared. In this video, I'm going to give you a complete walkthrough of my setup and how everything went for shooting school portraits. This isn't the first time that I've shot high volume photography. I've done a lot of sports teams, but this is the first time that I've ever done a school. And having photographed kids before, there are lots of things that I learned that I took into this experience. So I wanted to share with you my entire setup, including all of the gear, settings, and extra items that made everything go smoothly. The school that I had the opportunity to photograph has 520 students and faculty, and I had to photograph them all within one day. Now that was a huge undertaking, and I definitely felt a bit overwhelmed before getting started. Typically, if I was going to be shooting that many people, I would want to spread that out over a couple of days. But due to the availability of space at the school, they're putting in a new building that's not yet ready, so all I had was one day available, so I had to make it work. Let's talk about the gear. First of all, I'm going to link to everything that I talk about in this video down in the description below. Know that these were the items that I decided to use. They're not the items that you need to use. There are a lot of different ways to do this, but this is the way that I chose to handle it in my situation. Now, my primary camera is the Sony A1. This is the A1 II, so this is the latest edition of the camera, and I was using the 50 to 150 millimeter G Master lens. Now, these two lenses, both the 50 to 150 millimeter and the 28 to 70 millimeter G Master, have been my go-to lenses since these lenses came out. I almost never carry prime lenses with me anymore because I could shoot shallow depth of field with both of these lenses, and I don't have to sacrifice by limiting myself to one single focal length. Now, the reason that I chose to go with a 50 to 150 as opposed to a 70 to 200 was simply because I didn't necessarily know what my space was going to call for. I also knew that I was going to be shooting in a gym that didn't have the best lighting, and that I was going to be using continuous lighting as opposed to flash, and we'll talk a little bit more about that decision later in the video. I also decided to put a polarizer filter on the front of the camera because I knew that there would be a lot of faculty with glasses and even some kids wearing glasses, and the gym was going to have uncontrollable lighting, so I wanted to make sure I could minimize for any glare or weird artifacting that might happen in the students' glasses. And though I did have a few issues due to just lighting angle and curvature of the glasses and not being able to compensate for everything, I had minimal editing that I had to do to fix those problems. So next, let's talk about the backdrop. I have a variety of different backdrops that I've used for different purposes, most of them paper type backdrops, but I wanted to go with something that was a little bit easier to set up. So I ended up purchasing a Westcott X-Drop Pro setup, which is a lightweight stand system with a spandex-like fabric that comes in a variety of different colors and patterns. I ended up going with the blue concrete in 8 foot by 8 foot, which gave me a massive backdrop, plenty of room, and it worked out absolutely fantastic. Now let's talk about the lights. I mentioned earlier that I went with continuous lighting. I did this strategically for a couple of reasons. First of all, managing strobes over a long period of time can become kind of tricky. Batteries run out, things tend to happen, and when you are handling high volume of subjects, things are moving quickly, and you don't necessarily want to invite any more complexity into your situation. Now, of course, there are lots of strobes that can be plugged into power. I don't own any strobes that can be plugged into power. I simply have speedlight type flash heads and some Godox flash heads that I use predominantly when I'm shooting outdoors. But the main reason that I decided to go with continuous lighting is because little kids don't like flash getting blown in their eyes. It makes them nervous. Some kids get a little bit scared or frustrated by it. And so as they're waiting in line for their picture, as they're watching their friends get light blown into their face, their anxieties are building up and all of that stuff. And so I decided to go with continuous lighting. Now, back in the day, continuous lighting might have been problematic. Either the bulbs were extremely hot and required a lot of wattage, or the LED technology just simply wasn't bright enough. But these days, LED lights are insanely bright, and I used a couple of different lights that I had available. They're the lights that I actually use in this room. This light over here, which is my key light and was the key light in my portrait setup, is a light from Great Video Maker. They sent that light to me a month ago, and I've been testing it out and trying it in different environments. It's extremely inexpensive and high quality. It's $185, and it was powerful enough to be my key light, and it gave me no problems throughout the day. The other two lights, one that I have up here and one that I have up there behind me out of camera, are from Nanlite, and those are the Forza 60B. All of these lights can be tuned to various color temperatures, and the Nanlites I've had for quite a while. Before putting the Great Video Maker light up in my key light position, I had a Forza 300, I believe, from Nanlite as well. But the price of these LED lights are coming down substantially. It would actually be much more cost effective to get a handful of these lights from Great Video Maker than it would be to set yourself up with a full set of strobes. Now, the light modifiers that I used for the Forza 60s are actually the Nanlite Forza 60 softboxes that are created specifically for those lights. Now, they could be used on other things as well because they use the Bowen style mount, but they're sized appropriately for those lights and also branded for them as well. My key light was the Rapid 90 parabolic softbox from Nanlite, and that is the 35-inch. It comes in two different options. There's a larger one, but I have the 35-inch that I use right here, and I use those with grids on the front of them to control the light. So the light spread isn't so wide, it's much more channeled. The reason that I use grids in this environment and the reason that I left the grids on for the portrait environment is so that the light wouldn't spill all over the background and it would channel that light more specifically to my subject. Blue is actually in the school colors, and I wanted that blue to stay nice and dark. I didn't want it to be bright and distracting. So let's talk about the tripod that I used. I actually used a video tripod. This is my Manfrotto tripod with a 500 series head on it. Now, why did I use a video tripod? Now, the reason that I wanted to use this, and I used it in this configuration, I didn't have the video arm on it or anything like that. I wanted to use a video tripod because I can have some pan and tilt and very easily maneuver those things around while having the fluid drag enabled on the tripod. What that means is that as I'm making just little minute adjustments, because as every kid gets seated, they're maybe a little bit more forward, maybe just off a little bit, I need to make ever so slight movements with the camera so that I could frame them back up. So I can't have a camera just locked off on the tripod. I needed a tripod like this with a fluid head that I can unlock, or with twisting on the camera a little bit, I could just really easily pan the camera back and forth to frame up my subject really quickly without wasting much time. Most other photography tripods, when you release them, are going to twist and everything else is going to move. And so I'd have to spend time making sure that my camera was straight up and down and aligned properly, and I didn't want to waste my time there, so a video tripod worked out really well in this situation. Now, attached to the bottom of the lens, I'm using a quick release plate that snaps into the Falcam F38 system. Now, this quick release system makes it very easy for me to pop the camera right in and lock it, and then take the camera right out with the push of a button, and then I can shoot handheld if I needed to. There were some instances where I was shooting a whole bunch of kids, and then there'd be a faculty member, and then I'd be back to a bunch of kids. So rather than readjusting my tripod for height, I would just pop the camera off of the tripod, come up a little bit higher, shoot that portrait of the faculty member, and then pop it right back down into the tripod. Now, what is nice also about this tripod in particular is that I could raise it up as the kids got taller. I unfortunately didn't get the kids coming through in grades from kindergarten all the way to 12. I had some preschoolers, kindergartners, then third graders, then sixth graders, then back to second graders. And so it jumped around a little bit. And so I was going up and down with the tripod so that I could make sure to keep the camera at an appropriate height for the average height of the kids in that grade level. Now, I had my lights on a couple of different stands. My key light was on an Avenger C stand. I wanted a nice, strong stand that had good footing because the key light was going to be bigger, a bigger softbox, and I wanted that to be stable. So I used an Avenger C stand. There are other companies that make that type of stand, like Impact, but all the C stands that I own are from Avenger. And then the other two lights were on medium-duty light stands. Nothing too fancy there. They were just light stands that I had. One of those lights was going to be low to the ground, so not much of a risk there, and the other light was going to be back near the backdrop out of the way, so I knew that that one wouldn't be an issue either. I also brought all of my extension cords and power adapters that I needed. I knew that I was going to be in the gym, didn't necessarily know where I was going to be able to set up, so I brought extra extension cords in case I needed to grab power from an outlet that was pretty far away. Now, in some situations, I will actually bring my own power, and I have a couple of those DJI power banks that I use, but that wouldn't have really worked out all day long in a continuous lighting setting. So if we had had an issue with power, then we would have been dead in the water for the day. Thankfully, we didn't have any issues. And of course, it goes without saying, I brought a bunch of extra batteries for my camera because I knew I was going to be shooting a couple thousand images and that the back screen of my camera was probably going to be on most of the day. But I did end up only going through 1.5 batteries and capturing just shy of 2,000 images. So now let's talk about camera and lighting settings. Well, with the lights, I set all of the lights at daylight balance 5600K. I had my key light set at 100% because we were in the gym. I didn't want everything to be all up in the faces of the students that were going to be getting their photos taken. I wanted there to be a bit of space so that they didn't feel claustrophobic, and so that my wife, who was my assistant, could move about the area without knocking anything over or feeling like she was going to be in the way of anything. So I had the key light set at 100%. And the fill light I had set to 60% power, and the hair light that I had in the back was set to 100%. Now, the key light goes without explaining. It is the main light that is going to be lighting our subject. We also had the fill light, which I decided to put low and shooting up at the subject because I didn't want to have any shadows or anything under the chin. Now, the lights were on inside of the gym. There was no easy way to shut off just some of the lights in the gym without the lighting becoming a bit weird. So the lights were just left on in the gym. At this particular school, the school is built around the gym, so there ends up being traffic and people coming through the gym, so the lights needed to stay on. So I needed these lights to be nice and bright, but typically in an environment where I'd have more control over the room lights, I wouldn't need these lights to have been so bright. Now, the reason that I have a hair light in the back is to create some separation between my subject and the background. That light in the back adds a layer of separation and helps separate them. A lot of students, even though I did give instructions that they sent out through an email not to wear a dark blue color, there are a few other recommendations I made that would help prevent them from blending in with the background. I knew that not everybody was going to follow those instructions. And so having a hair light not only adds a nice light on the backside of their head, but it also adds a separation of the subject from the background. So even if they're wearing a color that is the exact same as the background, having that light right here on the backside helps separate them from that background. And that's also one of the reasons that I have that as my third light in this studio situation. You could see the light coming right off the back of my shoulder. And if I didn't have that light back there, I would kind of blend in, and this shallow room would seem even more shallow because I would blend in with the items that are in the back of the room. Now, I mentioned that I had my light set to 5600 Kelvin, which is daylight balanced. I also set the white balance on my camera. You see, if you leave your camera in auto white balance, your camera is going to change the white balance a little bit here and there to neutralize the entire scene. The camera is not going to know that your lights are set to 5600K, so it's going to evaluate the scene, and it might take something from the background. It might take something from what the subject is wearing, maybe even their skin tones, and try to white balance. And so you'd end up with slight variations in white balance throughout your day. Maybe every single photo that you took might have a slight variation in white balance. Now, cameras are getting really good. It's probably not going to be that big of a deal, but I wanted white balance to be absolutely consistent because in my editing process, I didn't want to spend a bunch of time white balancing all of these photos. So if I set my camera to daylight white balance, which matches the lights, then I know I'm going to get consistent white balance across the board. And when I create the edit for one image, I can paste that edit across all of the other images and not have to make white balance adjustments there. So let's talk about camera settings. I didn't have to change any camera settings pretty much for the entire day. I did change my ISO a little bit once or twice. I had my shutter speed set at 1/200th of a second. Now, why 1/200th of a second? Well, when you have continuous light, you don't have any light to freeze the action. Not that we have much action when we're taking portraits, but we do have little kids who can be a little squirmy and move around a bit. And so when you're shooting with strobes, you could shoot at a slower shutter speed because the burst of light will help freeze the action. But when you don't have that burst of light and you're using continuous lighting, you don't have that burst of light to assist with the freezing of action. So you do need to increase your shutter speed a little bit. And I set mine at 1/200th, and I didn't have any issues there. If you know you're going to have some really squirmy kids, you might increase your shutter speed a little bit more and then increase your ISO to compensate. Now, this lens is an f2 lens, and I could go all the way down to f2, but I didn't. I stayed at f2.2 the entire time, which is pretty much wide open, but I wanted that shallow depth of field because as nice as the background is, I did not want any texture from the background showing up in my image. The background was pulled pretty tight, so there wasn't any big noticeable wrinkles or anything like that in the background, and there wasn't anything really that I could have even steamed out of the background. It was pulled pretty tight, but I wanted to use that shallow depth of field to soften up the background for sure. I didn't want the background to be in focus at all. Now, I probably could have shot with something more like an f4 and gotten a little bit more of a depth of field on my subjects, but I also wanted to shoot with a wide aperture so that I wouldn't have to increase my ISO really high. That's another consideration when shooting with continuous lighting. Even though these continuous lights are getting pretty bright, the burst of light that's able to be produced from a good flash definitely can't be matched by a continuous light and wouldn't be comfortable if I had to have the continuous light set that bright the entire time. So I had my ISO set at 1000 on the camera, which is not a big deal at all for the A1, and pretty much all modern mirrorless cameras are not going to have any issue shooting at ISO 1000. Now with this lens, most of the time I was shooting at 150 millimeters, so that's max zoom for this lens. Sometimes I did need to back off maybe to 120 millimeters if I was shooting a faculty member, but most of the time, because the bulk of the students were younger students, I was shooting at 150 millimeters, like I said, sometimes backing off to around 120 millimeters. Now let's talk about some of the extra items that I had on hand that made things run much more smoothly. I bought a bunch of bulk combs off of Amazon, and we didn't end up using many of these because most of the photos were shot earlier in the day, but some of these came in handy with getting some of the flyaways and some of the bedhead off of some of the younger kids, and of course some of the kids that forgot that it was picture day. Now, we also had a spray bottle with some water, not to keep the kids in line, but to help with some of those areas where the hair wasn't behaving and we needed a little bit of water and a comb really quick just to take care of it. Now, I also brought a whiteboard and a set of pens. Now, the whiteboard came in handy because I don't know all the faculty members and they didn't really have anything for me to identify the faculty members with. So the faculty would write down their last name on the board, and then I'd take my first picture of each of them with the board and then take the photos, and then the next person would come through with the board. I'd take a photo of that and then take their portraits. So that way I know all the faculty members. The faculty images are going to be used for their ID cards, and so I need to know the faculty by name so that I can set the file names appropriately for their system. The whiteboard was also useful because they allow for sibling photos to be taken beforehand. So maybe little siblings that aren't yet in school, if the parents want to have a portrait of them taken, they can come and I need to know their name so they can write it down on the board, put it in a photo, and that makes it very easy for me to know who it is in that photo. All right, let's talk about staying organized. First of all, having a clipboard with a schedule that the school provides is extremely important. Now, I provided the clipboard, but the school provided the schedule, and you can see here what they've provided is a full breakout of when each class was going to be coming in for their photos. We have everything starting at 7:30 for sibling photos, staff, teachers, and all of that, starting from 7:30 to 8. And then we're just going classes all the way through until 3 p.m. with a couple of little breaks for me here. I have the in and out time, which is fantastic. I also have the student count all the way down so that I know what to expect as far as the amount of students per class. Now, these little cards were also printed that have the student's name, the grade, their homeroom, and their ID. It's important for me to have their name and their ID because I have to provide the school with a master list of images that have the student ID as the file name, because the school will take all of those images and upload it into their system, and their system will match those photos with the ID with the appropriate student, and that system they also use for printing out the ID cards. So it makes the process really easy for them, but in order to keep things simple for me, I need to make sure that I know who the student is, what their ID is, so that we can appropriately name those files and provide them with a master copy of student body images. Now, another thing that I did periodically throughout the day is actually back up my images. Even though my camera shoots to 2 SD cards, I didn't want to rely on that, so when I had a few moments of breathing room, I would take the card out and I would back that card up to my computer. I had my laptop there. In this particular situation, I was not shooting tethered to the laptop because I was going to be capturing so many images so quickly that I didn't want to be waiting for my camera to be writing images to the laptop. I just wanted to capture as fast as I could. Now, one of the biggest, best things that you could possibly have to help you out on a day like I had yesterday is an assistant who not only is good with kids, but is good with details and is extremely attractive and maybe is your wife. That is exactly what I had, and she was the main reason that everything went smoothly. Now, I always prepare assuming that I'm going to need to take control of any situation at any time. That way I'm never caught off guard and I don't have to pass blame on anything for going wrong because I've thought through everything. And then if things go smoothly, it's a pleasant surprise and I'm able to spend more time at the camera and not feel stressed out or pulled in too many different directions. So I was fully prepared to not only be taking the photos, but also be directing the kids and moving them and aligning them, which I knew was going to take a bit of time. Knowing that I was going to be taking photos of up to 520 people in one day, I knew that I would have maybe 1 minute with each person and no time to spare throughout the day. But because my wife was there and she was helping and things went so well, and we also had a couple of helpers making sure that the classes were lined up and ready to go, we were able to get things done smoothly and quickly, and we were moving kids through so fast that we actually ended up with extra time. It was definitely not something that I was expecting. Never having taken photos of 520 subjects in one day, I didn't want to spend much time with trying different poses and doing different things, which of course I would have loved to be able to do, but I knew that I needed to get through the photos and get them as fast as possible, and that meant not wasting much time, capturing a good smile, and moving on to the next subject as quickly as possible. Because we had helpers handing out the cards and getting them to the appropriate students, because I had my wife there to help them hold the card up, to put their hands in their lap, to turn a little bit to the side, to give me a nice smile, to sit up nice and straight, and look into the lens for me to take a couple of pictures, I didn't have to be sitting behind the camera giving off commands, which tends to make people a bit nervous and uneasy, regardless of their age. That is something that's fairly common. All photographers who have done portraits know this. When you're behind the camera, you are making somebody nervous just right out the gate. Doesn't matter how confident they are, they're already feeling a little uneasy because you have this camera and you're able to capture a moment and they want that moment to be absolutely great and they're worried that it might not be. So if you have somebody that's handling all the directing and doing most of the talking, then you can focus on taking the picture and giving them a countdown, taking that photo, telling them that it was great, and then the assistant can help them off the set and welcome on the next subject. So let's walk through my entire setup. Here is my pile of equipment that I came in with. I had extras of a few different things just to make sure that I wasn't left high and dry if something stopped working. Looking at my setup here, you can see the backdrop, and the backdrop does have some creases down here in these sections. Those are things that I probably could have taken care of if I had a way to pull the backdrop out a little bit. But because I was shooting at such a shallow depth of field, you could not tell. But if I was shooting at something like an f5.6, maybe even an f6, then you definitely would have been able to tell that there were a few creases in the backdrop. Here's my key light set to 100%. This is the Forza 60. Here is my fill light, nice and low to the ground. Also a Forza 60 set at 60% intensity. Here's the camera on the video head tripod that I would use to pan back and forth just a little bit or tilt up and down if needed. I had a 360 camera mounted just for a little bit of B-roll. Here's my main key light with the Great Video Maker SD200B on an Avenger C stand. And here is my rolling cart, which actually came in handy. This rolling cart was absolutely fantastic. It folds up into something nice and slim that I can slide into the back of the truck. And it really came in handy for storing the cases for the lights, an additional backdrop in case I wanted to go with a different color, and having a laptop stand and a place to set my coffee. So once I get back to the office, the first thing I do is back up the SD card. I take the card out of my camera, I put it in my laptop, and I back it up to my NAS, my network attached storage device that I use for archiving everything. After that, while the SD card is still connected, I import all of the images into Lightroom. Now, I actually use Lightroom Classic for shoots like this because it's a large amount of photos and I don't need them going up into the cloud. Normally, I would use the other version of Lightroom that allows the images to sync across all of my devices. I use that for much smaller shoots, typically when I have 150 or less images. But in a situation like this, I want an individual Lightroom catalog only dedicated to these images, so I use Lightroom Classic. Now, I create that Lightroom catalog and the folder that those images are going to go into in a Dropbox folder. That means that as I import all of those images in, not only the Lightroom catalog, but the images are going to be backed up to Dropbox. So now I have an SD card with the images on them. I have a NAS with the images on them. And I have the images going up into the cloud to be backed up there. This assures that there won't be any situation where I end up losing images. Now, I ended up shooting just shy of 2,000 images. We had 8 students that were absent and 4 faculty members that were absent as well. So we will have a retakes date next month where I will capture their images, as well as any parents that want their student to take an alternate image. I've already created my edit that is not a heavy edit like I would if I was shooting an outdoor portrait to really make things pop. I want to keep things nice and natural and clean in this type of portrait environment, but I do want the image to pop a little bit. So it's a very subtle correction that I'm applying to these images, and it's something that I can create once and apply to all of the images. And then of course I will go through each one and make sure that that looks good on every subject. There will likely need to be some minor adjustments that I'll have to make for people with really red hair or darker complexion skin. But overall, the post-processing and getting me to the point where I can export all of these images should take me no more than an hour. The next step will be uploading all of those images to my online gallery. Parents will be given access to that gallery where they could purchase digital downloads or print products. And currently I'm using PicTime, which is not the best platform for this type of photography. It's definitely going to work, but in the future, if I do more schools, I'll probably be switching over to Got Photo. So what would I do different? Well, I didn't think that we were going to be as streamlined as we were. We ended up being quite a bit ahead of schedule and having way more downtime than I could have anticipated because we were so fast at shooting the images and getting on to the next student and moving through all the students really fast. Had I known that we'd be able to be that efficient, I would have liked to have been able to take an alternate pose, maybe even a third pose option, because having multiple poses increases your opportunity for revenue because parents might want more than just one option. So knowing this now, I won't be going into my next shoot as overwhelmed, thinking that I need to optimize for speed and efficiency. I know I'll have a little bit of extra time for things like an alternate pose. And aside from some slight logistical changes like location and the overhead lighting, probably wouldn't change anything else. Well, I know that was a lot of information. I have no idea how long this video is going to be, but if you're still watching, thank you so much for being here. Make sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe. But if you want to connect with me deeper, check out the link in the description to my newsletter. I try to send something interesting out at least once a week, so make sure to join me there, and don't forget to check out all of the product links to everything that I talked about in this video. Thanks again for being here, and I hope to see you back soon. Take care.